Hans, Gail Gluckman, and Jamie Fong are Gail.
Good evening, friends. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a jointly sponsored program of the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California and the China Society of Southern California. We're glad that you are able to join us here. It still feels odd that we're not in a restaurant or in a meeting place and seeing each other, but nevertheless, hopefully we'll have some good conversation and we'll be able to hear from a knowledgeable speaker and learn a bit more about our Chinese American and Chinese heritage. I am Eugene Moy. I'm a member of the board of the Chinese Historical Society. And for the last 45 years, plus years, we have been conducting programs in the community and presenting history, meaning the Chinese American history of Southern California and beyond. And beyond today means actually going back to our roots in China. And you'll hear more about the topic in just a moment. But just a quick note on the protocol. This meeting is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on our YouTube channel. So do feel free that if you're not able to catch the entire program tonight, and oftentimes, like many of our programs, there's a lot of information, a lot of dense information that you want to go back and review yourself. So all of our programs are actually recorded and available online. So we hope that you can pick up and any of our past programs and listen in. Anyway, I don't need to talk too much more. This is the November program for the Chinese Historical Society and the China Society. We don't have a speaker or a program scheduled yet for December, but keep your eyes open. It'll be coming. The Historical Society's website is chssc.org, and you can always go to our website, not only for monthly program information, but also for a lot of background history on the Chinese American community of Los Angeles. So you don't want to hear me talking too much. I'd like to welcome Bob Lee, who is president of the China Society of Southern California. He has been a longtime leader in our community. He's a third generation Los Angeles Chinatown business owner, and he has been a go-to source for me for a lot of information on the historic culture of China. And Bob always has some great insights on history and culture, and he's really the person who introduced us to today's speaker. And I'll let Bob really introduce David. Bob?
Well, before I introduce David, let me tell you a little bit more about China Society and my involvement both in China Society and the Historical Society. I guess a lot of you from the Historical Society know me because before the pandemic, you would hear me announce at almost every meeting, China Society is having such and such a program. Would you please come? And more often than not, I would be disappointed because there weren't that many people who would respond. So let me, and I think maybe this is a little bit because of fear. So let me tell you a little bit about my involvement with both groups. I am an American-born Chinese. I think I could be referred to as a banana, you know, yellow on the outside and white on the inside. I think this is especially true because I'm a baby boomer and my family moved from the East Adams neighborhood when I was 2 years old. We moved to Echo Park. Our family was probably one of maybe 3 families in that neighborhood also maybe one of 3 families that attended the local elementary school. So there weren't many Chinese there at the time. We didn't speak Chinese at home. And maybe some of you my age will remember that if you went to a Chinese banquet and you were my age, the waiters would come around passing out forks to you because we didn't know how to use chopsticks. And at my last quarter at UCLA, I decided to take a course in Mandarin on a pass-fail basis, and I almost failed. Later, I started working full-time at the store, and my Cantonese was virtually nil. So I learned that there was a Cantonese class taught on Saturdays at an elementary school in the Silver Lake area. And that's where I met Ella Kwan. Following that, I went to UCLA Extension and took a class in Cantonese there. And that's where I met Nino Wong. So you know that even people of my generation really didn't know much about China and Chinese. So when I started working at Jinhing, we were open fairly late and we were next to General Lee's banquet garden room. The China Society met there. They had been established in 1935 and they had met at General Lee's for many, many years. The members would come before their meeting and after their meeting and visit at the store. Some of their members told me, why don't you come for the program after dinner? You know, just come on in, you're welcome. So I did, and I think that was my introduction to Chinese culture. A few years later, the Historical Society was formed, and I was one of the charter members. I graduated from college before they had ethnic studies, so I knew virtually nothing about Chinese American history. So both of these groups have been really, they've increased my knowledge tremendously. And I think that you shouldn't be reluctant to go to either of the groups if you want to learn more about Chinese culture or the Chinese in America. Now let's get on to David. I met David Hugus, I don't know, 25 years ago. Many of you remember Kim Fong, who had Fong's gift shop on Chunking Road. And Kim was a very astute collector. Among the many things he collected were Chinese rank badges. And I would once in a while come across a rank badge, and sometimes I would buy things that I liked, but they didn't sell very well at the store. And so I would probably rationalize and say, I'm not a poor buyer, I'm just buying that for my collection. And a lot of my collections seem to be all these mistakes that I bought because they weren't sellable. Anyway, Kim introduced me to both Beverly Jackson and David Hugus. They went on to write a book called Ladder to the Clouds. And the book was actually 2 books in one. Beverly wrote the first part, which was on the examination process, and David wrote the part on Mandarin Squares. Not being an avid reader, I only read the part on Mandarin Squares because I knew nothing about that. And for this talk, we sort of stretched the thing to cover the examination process because we thought it would be of more interest to Chinese Historical Society members. So it's going to be a very interesting program. And one, just in talking to David, a lot of my misconceptions about the ladder to the clouds were solved. And it's a wonderful story of Chinese culture and perhaps helps explain the DNA of Chinese and Chinese Americans such as myself. David has written not only that book, but he has written a new book on Chinese rank badges. It was supposed to be out in June here in the United States, but unfortunately it won't be out until April or May of next year. If any of you are interested, hopefully I'll be able to stock it at the store and have it for people who would be interested in it. I think one very interesting thing about David is that he is one of these collectors who knows much more than the dealers know. And that is a real blessing, I think, to dealers like me, because he's a wonderful source of information. And a lot of times you run across all these things that you know nothing about, and that's the person you go to. So without further ado, David Hugus.
Thank you, Bob. And I hope slides are available here. I want to thank Bob Lee and the China Society and the China Historical Society for asking me to give this presentation. My interest in Chinese things it came from my hobby. It's not part of my profession. Bob reminded me when he was talking about Gim Fong that I saw my first real rank badge in Gim Fong's shop when he shared some of the things that he had hidden in his back room with us. He is also probably responsible for me being focused on Chinese rank badges, because as part of that first night with Gim, he gave me a copy of Harvard Journal of Asiatic Studies, Volume 8, that was published in 1946. And that had a long article on Chinese rank badges. And after I had read that article, I found out that I had fallen in love. And so for the past 30 years, as I could squeeze time out from my profession and my personal life, I have studied Chinese rank badges and Chinese history just as part of a hobby that was most interesting and intellectually stimulating. So we're going to talk tonight about the Chinese civil service exams. Just as a background for that, we'll refer to the Confucian classics. And just to make sure that we understand what we're talking about, that was composed of the 4 books and the 5 classics. They're listed here: the Analects, Mencius, the Great Learning, the Doctrine of the Mean. The title Doctrine of the Mean is sometimes translated as the element of perfect balance. The 5 classics were poetry, documents, which really was historical speeches, the classic of changes, the I Ching, the classic of rites, and the spring and autumn annuals. Let's look at the examination process just as a general thing before we try and dissect exactly how it was conducted. But the examination process was essentially a lifelong process. If feasible, Sun started studying at age 3, learning the 1,000-character poem. The 1,000-character poem was a poem of 250 lines of 4 characters each, with no character ever repeated. And so that became kind of the primer for a son who wanted to start his process on becoming a Chinese official. One of the things that we probably ought to tackle right off the bat, and that is the impact of wealth on people's ability to participate in the examination process. And I don't think it will surprise anyone to know that wealth, as it has been in every society and every age, was a significant benefit for those who were studying for the examinations. Rich families could afford, at the most basic level, to have their sons studying as opposed to working in the fields trying to keep the family fed. They also had access to tutors, and they had their own private libraries, which of course would facilitate the study required to take the examination process. However, the advantages of wealth were ameliorated by several processes. Economic groups called economic clans could establish a tax-free foundation that would subsidize the study of clan members to study for the examinations. And in more rural areas, villages or even groups of villages would also establish tax-free foundations to encourage the study by promising students in the more rural areas. Some rich families allowed anyone to study at special academies that they funded, and temples and monasteries also sometimes offered free examination studies for people who could not afford it. I think the advantage of wealth is shown by the fact that the 2% of the families that actually had officials in their lineage contributed 50% of the officials in the Ming Dynasty and 2/3 of the officials in the Qing Dynasty. But if you turn that coin over, you find that in the Ming Dynasty, nearly 50%, and I think that nearly 50% was 49.7% of all of the officials in the Ming Dynasty came from commoner families. And more than a third, 37%, of all of the Qing Dynasty officials came from commoner families. And so while wealth clearly was an advantage, it was not an obstacle that could not be overcome with intensive study and application. But the preparation for the examination required their memorization of the 4 books and 5 classics just as a starting point. And that was over 600,000 characters of text. And the intellect that required, is something that I find quite striking and quite intimidating. I hold a PhD in statistics, but the concept of trying to memorize 600,000 characters of text is something that I find intimidating. But in addition to that rote memory, they also had to master poetry, essay writing, and calligraphy. And so this was a very strenuous and strict curriculum that was followed. And there were 6 examinations that you had to pass in order to become an official. There were 2 preliminary examinations, 3 qualifying examinations, and the imperial examination. And all of those had to be passed before you could become an official.
David?
Yes, sir.
Are you going to share your slides?
I have the slides up and I can see. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to share my screen. Thank you so much for doing that. So here we are, and let me backtrack. Here are the 4 books and 5 classics. And this was the slide we were talking about. And thank you, Bob, for bringing that to my attention. In most of the Ming and Qing dynasties, there were about 2 million people, 2 million males, studying for the examinations, but only about 100 per year, that is 300 in each of the triennial tests, actually became officials. And the average time to complete all of the examinations varied somewhat, but generally was in excess of 30 years. The average age for a person becoming an official in the Ming Dynasty was 33 years, and in the Qing Dynasty, 36 years. So this was a tremendous commitment, not only in the amount of material that was required, but the duration of the study and attempts at the examination. So that kind of begs the question, why in the world would anyone take the examination? And the most important thing is this was the only way that you could really fulfill your filial piety responsibility, by bringing honor to your parents and ancestors. You owed filial piety to your parents because they gave you life, and you owed it to your ancestors because they could intercede with heaven to assist the family and make sure that the family was successful. And after one successful assignment as an official could petition the emperor to have his father and his grandfather awarded his own rank. And that was the apex of your filial piety, that you could bring honor to your father and your ancestors by bestowing on them the rank that you had achieved on your own. And so filial piety, which was one of the cornerstones of Chinese imperial society, and probably also is an important characteristic of Chinese American society as well. But the only way you could really fulfill your filial piety responsibility was to bring honor to your family, and the primary way to do that was to become an official. There was also a legal protection that was given to an official. An official could be questioned in a legal matter only if the emperor approved the investigation. The official was also exempt from local corporal punishment, which include judicial torture, which was common during imperial China. Even a student could not be questioned by a Chinese official without his teacher being present to make sure that the student was treated appropriately. There was also a wealth characteristic or dimension to being a successful examination candidate, and that was the official was exempt from a service tax. And while the rules on the exemption varied over time and sometimes included all the members, male members of a particular family, but even when it was constrained only to the person who was actually official, the family could transfer all its land into the ownership of the official, and the land would become exempt from tax as well. In addition, when you were an official, people wanted to curry your favor, and you were in a position to generate extra legal income. And there have been estimates that indicated that as much as 95% of an official's income came from extra legal means. Now, that gives an unfortunate and probably inaccurate impression that all officials were corrupt and only out looking out for themselves. We can talk about the concept of corruption within the context of an official's performance of duty in the question and answer period if you're interested. But things that mitigated the assertion that this meant that all officials were corrupt is that the officials had no official budget until the young Jin emperor in the early 1700s established at least a small budget for the districts. prior to that time and for the 150 years after that, where the budget was not adjusted for inflation, a district magistrate had a lot of requirements and a lot of obligations and no funds with which to discharge them. The official was also constrained not to ever serve in the province of his birth, and he would have to go into his district magistrate assignment with essentially no friends or nobody he could trust. Because of that, most officials had their own staff that went with them on their new assignments. The salaries for those staff was not provided by the government. So there were some constraints that required an official to generate income outside normal means, and we can talk about that in greater detail if that's of interest. One of the other reasons for the examination was the social mobility. When you became an official, your standing in the community was significantly enhanced because you were a recognized and demonstrated Confucian scholar, and education was valued in imperial China. And with few exceptions, any male could take the examinations. And so this was something that could appeal to the entire country as a good thing for society, so that anybody could achieve or aspire to the apex of Chinese society by taking the examinations and passing them. But of course, the way that you passed the examinations was this intensive study. And so education became inculcated as the only real way that you could improve your life or your status of your family. And although the examination process was initially fostered in China, China was the main culture in the Pacific Rim for centuries, if not millennia, and that influenced other societies to have a similar focus on education. And I think that the focus on education still exists within the Chinese American society. And saying that the examinations were a good way to increase your social status and pay homage to your ancestors, but that begs the questions of why the examinations existed in the first place. The examinations and the official civil service was originally generated as a counter to aristocratic families dominating the court appointments. When the central government was not strong, and when before China had been collected together as a single entity, aristocratic families would recommend their own sons for official positions, and that became a very incestuous process where those sons of the aristocratic families would recommend their sons to follow them. And so you had these power centers that existed outside the court. And one way to try and counter those that control that the aristocratic families had was to introduce officials who owed their allegiance to the central government and not to just their families. The examination process and studying for the examination also gave a common set of philosophical guidelines for running the government. Confucius was anything other than a democrat. He believed in a hierarchical system because he believed that a hierarchy was part of what the Chinese called the natural order of things. You know, he noted that there was heaven on high and earth below, mountains on high and valleys below. And so the natural order of things indicated that there should be a hierarchy. And so the government that was established in Imperial China clearly was one of a hierarchy where there were people on high and other people who were considered to be of lower status. It also united the scholars from various backgrounds with a common sets of beliefs. Everybody was steeped in the Confucian classics, and everybody had a common frame of reference for what constituted proper behavior, how people should behave, and what constituted the characteristics of an effective official. And Confucius emphasized the obedience to those in power, which included parents within the family and officials, and ultimately the emperor. It provided social mobility for commoners who might otherwise become rebels. Anybody who, because the examination was open essentially to any male, anybody could aspire to become an official, and those people who might otherwise had felt excluded from any social mobility might have become rebels and been a disruptive part of society. And the examination system tended to draw them into an approved process that added to the stability as opposed to introducing instability in society. One of the other things that was favorable from the officials' presentation is that having to pass the examinations provided some rationale from keeping the emperor from just appointing his favorites to all of the important positions. Now, clearly, that was not a total constraint on an emperor. The emperor was an ultimate autocrat and could essentially do whatever he chose, but it did provide some constraints on unconstrained exercise of power by the emperor. No system is 100% perfect, and every system had its drawbacks. Some of the drawbacks associated with the examination process was that they stifled innovation. Confucius is reputed to have said that he never produced anything new. All he did was preserve the wisdom of the ancients. And that attitude permeated the preparation for the examinations, and any deviation from the prescribed texts brought harsh punishment from any instructor or tutor that was involved in tutoring a student. The punishment was often very physical and very corporal. And so any inclination that anybody had to deviate from the wisdom of the ancient was physically punished. And that inclination was literally beaten out of the students as part of their preparation for the examinations. Quite frequently, the emperors would deride the officials as men of empty words who were only good at memorizing passages and contemplating philosophical concepts and were unsuited to run a government. And it is in truth the curriculum lacked any practical scientific subjects. Mathematics, economics, engineering were all considered beneath the officials' position, and they were left to the merchants and the people who ran the economy, and so there was in fact an absolute dearth of practical scientific subjects inside the preparation for the examinations. This didn't prove to be a problem until the Industrial Revolution occurred, and there's no reason to believe that the philosophical, moral teachings of Confucius were any less suited for running a country in pre-industrial societies than the focus on Latin and religious studies that were used as the basis for education in Europe. One of the characteristics of the examination process, as we find in any situation where people are under extreme stress and extreme pressure, those who graduated together tended to bond together to form cliques with them and the officials who passed them. And those cliques sometimes operated for their own self-interest as opposed to the interest of the general government. And from the emperor's perspective, and this is the flip side of the last entry on the constraints that an official, coherent official set of officials imposed on the emperor viewed the set of officials as a potential constraint on his power. And from the emperor's perspective, that was a drawback of the system. The importance of the examinations varied over time as the power of the central government waxed and waned. At the end of the Zhou dynasty and the end of the Han dynasty, there was a period where the central government lost its power, and the examination process was largely moribund. But the examinations were started with the first dynasty that united China, and that was the Qin Dynasty that was established in the 221 BCE. And even prior to the Qin Dynasty being founded, the Han Imperial Academy had been established in 124 BCE, and the instructors there were expert in at least one of the Confucian classics. The Han Dynasty continued and expanded the examinations. Originally, the examination was a personal questioning by the prospective official, by the emperor himself, on policy questions. But later, the burden became too great on the emperor, and later there were 5 ways that you could earn your official status by being classified as a special talent, or passing examinations and having expertise in law, calligraphy, mathematics, or knowledge of the classics, which was called the Ming Qing examination. But between the Han Dynasty collapse and the Sui Dynasty, most officials were appointed because the central government was weak. But examinations resumed under the Sui and were very well established during the Tang Dynasty. During the Sui and Tang dynasties, there was a 6th possible examination. That was the Jinsi examination, which was an examination that not only required knowledge of the Confucian classics, but also required expertise in poetry and the composition of essays. The unusual talents has never been fully explained in any references that I've seen, but the claim was that the standards were far too high for anybody to qualify, and essentially no one qualified under the unusual talents examination. Law, calligraphy, and mathematics were considered too narrow for people to run the government, and the Ming Qing was ridiculed. The adherents to the Ming Qing examination system were characterized as parrots who could only regurgitate rote memorized passages. And so eventually the Jinsi became the only examination that was available in the last 3 dynasties, the Wen, the Ming, and the Qing. So with that brief examination, examination of the examination history, we'll now start to discuss the actual sequence of the examinations. The first examination that a student could take was given by the district magistrate, and it was conducted in the district magistrate's local government office complex called the Yamen, as many as 4,000 or 5,000 applicants might take a single test. All of the districts in a single prefecture gave the test on the same day to make sure that no person would take more than one district examination in any one given year. And every person who took the test was identified by his teacher to try and avoid a person taking the test for somebody else, impersonating the student and taking the test for someone else. Once the applicants were identified, they were assigned to a seat, and they were only referred to by their seat number thereafter. Their test papers only recorded their seat number, and the district magistrate then would grade the examination without knowing which particular student had submitted that examination. The Yamen was locked and secured while the test was in progress, and proctors circulated during the examination to make sure that there was no cheating. The examination was conducted in 4 different parts on separate days. The candidates were expected to start taking the district examination by 16. They could take it earlier, but you were considered slow if you hadn't memorized all 9 Confucian classics by the time you were 16. Each day, the candidates were required to respond questions about the 4 books, the 5 classics. They were asked to compose poetry or to prepare policy questions. When the exams were turned in, calligraphy was examined to make sure that it was appropriate and acceptable. And when the papers were turned in, the district magistrate was confined to the Yamen until all of the responses had been graded. And this was one of the very low-level anti-bribe considerations that was in place at that particular level. The candidates at each segment of the examination had their names posted on the Yamen door. The top scoring student had his name at the top of the paper, and the other the successful candidates had their names written in counterclockwise manner until all of the successful candidates' names were listed, and the character for successful was written in the center of the paper. If you passed the district examination, the only reward was you were eligible to take the prefectural examination. The prefectural examination was held obviously by the prefect, but each candidate was accompanied to that examination by his district magistrate and was identified by name and as a legitimate student by the district magistrate as he entered the testing area. The prefectural examination was conducted very similar to the examination, except that there were only 3 stages to the examination instead of 4. And again, the only benefit that one got from passing the prefectural examination was be able to take the first level of the qualifying examinations. But since the qualifying examination actually had some effect on a person's status, the emperor became personally involved in the process. The successful prefectural examinations were eligible to take the qualifying exam that was given by the provincial director of studies. And this gentleman was appointed by the emperor directly and reported directly to the emperor without any intervening bureaucracy. So this was a very powerful position that he held, since he could bypass the entire bureaucracy if he had an issue that he thought needed to be brought to the emperor's attention. So he was accorded more respect than his rank actually required. But the director of studies was required to visit each prefect twice during his 3-year tour of duty, and a test was given at each of his visits. The tests were essentially the same, but the intent of the tests were different. one test was given to qualify new prefectural candidates who were taking their first qualifying examination or a subsequent one if they had failed previously. But they were also used to re-qualify previously successful prefectural candidates because they had to indicate that they were continuing to study and continue to be capable of successfully passing the qualifying examination. The second test that was given by the Director of Studies called those students who were successful candidates at the qualifying examination, but to limit the number of people who would be allowed to take the second level qualifying examination at the provincial level. So one test was to certify people as being successful takers of the qualifying exam, and the second was to determine which subset of that group of students was able to take the provincial examination. Now, the qualifying examination were identified by a district representative as they entered the test area. They were searched for cheat materials and any bribe money. Proctors circulated throughout the test area to preclude any cheating. And there were 10 violations of the rules that got you a stamp on your test material, which virtually guaranteed failure. One of those stamps was affixed 1 hour after the test started. And if a student hadn't started to answer one of his questions, and that stamp appeared on a blank sheet of paper, he was virtually guaranteed to fail because they figured that any subsequent entries on his test booklet result of copying or cheating. But you could also be cited for humming when you were trying to compose poetry, looking around, talking, leaving your seat, anything that indicated that you were anything other than totally focused on answering your examination questions. Clerks reviewed the test submissions for calligraphy and style and content. And if they passed the clerk's examination, the submissions were then reviewed and graded by the Director of Studies. And since this was a grading system done by an individual, the candidates tried to please the director by reading his writings, looking at his essays that he had written during his passage through the examination process, copying his style, duplicating his preferences. And so he had a significant impact on the scholarship inside his province. And after the 3 separate days of testing, successful candidates were sent an official letter that indicated that they had been victorious in passing the qualifying examination. This was a significant event. The candidates were now considered official government recognized students. Heretofore, they had just been candidates and they had received no official designation or recognition as students undertaking this rigorous examination process. They received the lowest of the 3 degrees, the Xinguan degree. They could erect a red sign above the entrance of their home, indicating that they held that degree. They were exempt from local corporal punishment. Their families now were considered part of the gentry, which meant that they now had access to the people of high economic status, and they could interact with the district magistrate on a level of equality. And they received a small government stipend to encourage further study. But Xinguan degree holders were not wealthy, and they frequently had to hold a job in order to be able to continue their studies. And candidates were considered old if they had not achieved this level of degree by age 40. But that also is just another indication of the lifelong commitment that this focus on education required. Once you pass the qualifying examination, and if you passed the test given by the director of studies in your province, you were then qualified to take the provincial examination. This was held in the second year of the 3-year examination rotation, and all provisional examinations were held at the same time for the same reason that the district exams were held, to keep people from trying to participate in more than one provincial examination. The examiners were selected individually by the emperor, but they were not all notified of their status as examiners at the same time. The travel time was different to each of the provincial examination sites. And so an examiner was identified only in sufficient time to pack his bags and leave the next day to travel to the provisional examination site where he would perform his duties. And this particular process was used to minimize the opportunity to bribe examiners. And when the examiner arrived at his examination site, he was confined to a separate walled compound within the actual examination walled compound to make sure that he was isolated from anyone who might want to bribe him. The penalties for accepting bribes were severe in both the Ming and Qing dynasties, and the penalties were laid out in both of those dynasties' legal codes. The Ming penalty started at 70 blows of the heavy bamboo for accepting a bribe of 1 ounce of silver, and were increased by 1 level for every additional 3 ounces of silver in the bribe, and had a maximum penalty of death by strangulation. The Qing penalties mirrored those of the Ming, but included a more severe penalty of decapitation. And the reason that decapitation was more serious than strangulation is because obviously your body was then in 2 parts. And if your body was not buried entire, then your heavenly soul could not go to heaven and join with the spirits of your ancestors. This is a schematic of an examination compound. The part of the exam compound in this area here is the examiner's compound. That was always in the northern part of the compound, and the compound was always oriented on a north-south axis that mirrored the emperor sitting in the north always. We can talk about that, why that was the case in the question and answer period, if you would like. These were the cells where the candidates actually sat composing their responses to the examination questions. And this structure in the center that appears to be a large tower actually was a large tower. It was manned by soldiers who could keep an overwatch over the entire compound to make sure that there were no unauthorized activity going on during the exam. In addition, there were thousands of soldiers who roamed the compound continuously to make sure that the candidates were staying in their cells and not doing anything untoward and not using copying material or any cheating things. The small cells were oriented in east-west rows, and we'll show a picture of them here. This is a picture of an actual examination site. You're seeing the entrance from the paveway from the entrance of the examination process to the entrance of the examiner's compound. These are the cells where the candidates resided during examination. The characters on the ends of the rows were characters from the 1,000-character poem. And so when a student arrived in the examination compound, he was given a character and a number, and the character was his row number and identified by one of the characters in the 1,000-character poem, and his number was the cell number in that particular row. Interestingly enough, the 1,000-character poem also had a military application. When a city was under siege and the guard posts were established around the periphery of the city walls, each of the guard posts was also designated by one of the characters from the 1,000-character poem. So that was part of the imperial culture that went far beyond just those studying for the examination. This is another picture of the rows of the examination cells with the character from the 1,000-character poem. This is a picture I took at the Nanjing Examination Museum. It's quite a nice facility. They have a small area where they have duplicated the examination cells. This part of the examination cell right here is a board that is currently in its high level. There is a second board behind it at a lower level. It's on the ledge that you can see very faintly here on the edge of the wall here. And in this high-low configuration, the low board served as a bench and the high board served as a table that provided a writing surface. And since the examination periods were 3 days in duration, this board could be moved to the lower level to provide a crude and rude sleeping surface for the candidate. The provincial examination was considered much more serious than even the qualifying exam, because someone who successfully passed the provincial examination could actually hold an official position. As I said, the compound had rows of cells running east to west, character from the 1,000-character poem. The cells were quite small, about 28 square feet. They only had 3 sides and a roof. One of the sides, the side facing the north, which faced the examiner's compound, was open to the elements. And I covered the 2 boards to be configured as either a bench and a table or a sleeping surface. The Xinguang degree holders were identified by a provincial official and strip searched on entry. The strip searching was done by military soldiers, and the military status was much, much less than the revered Confucian scholars. The military in both Ming and Qing dynasties were hereditary, and so there was no honor to be held because you held a military rank. You just inherited that from your father. So the soldiers took the opportunity to be as brutal and as degrading as they possibly could. And in some cases, the degree holders were so humiliated by that search process that they refused to continue the process, and they forfeited their opportunity to take the examination. Talking was forbidden in the test compound. You were expected to stay inside your cell, except for visits to the latrine. As I said, soldiers roamed the compound continuously to make sure that there were no obvious cheating going on, and there was no talking or commingling of the candidates. Once the test had started, the examination compound was absolutely inviolate. If a candidate died during the conduct of a test due to exposure or stress, his body was either thrown over the wall or passed through a small opening in the gate, but nothing was allowed to breach the sanctity of the examination compound while the test was underway. And the test was composed in 3 different periods, each of which was 3 days in duration. The grading of the provisional examination was an exercise in distrust of anybody involved in the grading process. The students taking the provisional examination wrote their responses in black ink on specially prepared exam booklets. When they submitted their responses were evaluated by clerks for calligraphy, and they could be disqualified by the clerks if their calligraphy was sloppy. But if the calligraphy was acceptable, the clerks then recopied the exact examination response in red ink. And that was to avoid the actual examiners from being able to identify any marks or any calligraphic stylus of any individual particular student. The red and black copies were compared by copy readers, and any adjustments that were required in a red copy were made in yellow ink by the copyists. The black copy was stored, and the red copy was then passed to the examiners. The associate examiners evaluated the red copies, made any comments that they thought were appropriate in blue ink, and passed those who were recommended for possible successful consideration to the chief and the deputy examiners. The chief and deputy examiners then examined the responses that had been passed to them and selected the successful candidates. If they needed to make any entries on the exam papers, those entries were made in black ink. The number of successful candidates was limited by quotas for each province. That also tied in with part of the wealth issue that we might want to get into in the question and answer period. The successful candidates at the professional examination were awarded the adorned degree. That was a lifelong degree. They never had to requalify. They could fly a flag at their house with the character of their degree on it in gold. But the success rate at the provisional examination was only about 1%. But adorned degree holders could hold official positions. They were never prohibited from holding official positions, but in Qing Dynasty, population dynamics indicated that almost all of the official positions were held by people who held a higher degree. And as noted previously, the classmates and the examiners who passed them often formed lifelong friendships, as any group under extreme pressure, common experienced pressure, often form friendships, and they sometimes impeded the functioning of the imperial bureaucracy. The final examination was the Metropolitan Examination. It was conducted in the 3rd year of the rotation, was open to all adorned degree holders. The same examiner appointment process and travel arrangements, the same security arrangements were in effect, and approximately 300 candidates were identified every 3rd year to take the palace examination. The palace examination was introduced in the Song Dynasty, and it was an attempt to avoid the clique formation among the examiners and classmates. That was largely unsuccessful. You know, the human dynamics of bonding with people who have shared stressful situation for you was just too powerful to overcome. Nominally, the tests were given and graded by the emperor. In actual fact, the emperor's senior advisors actually prepared the questions and graded the tests and made recommendations to the emperor. But unlike the strict security and the script searches that were associated with the provincial and the metropolitan exams, the test in the Forbidden City was given to people who were virtually guaranteed to be officials, and they were treated with respect. The soldiers now carried their baggage and their writing materials to the examination site. The exam was given inside one of the palaces in the Forbidden City. Lunch and tea were served by servants. It was very much a congenial and comfortable situation, a very stark contrast from the conditions under which the previous exams had been taken. The only people who didn't receive the Jinsi degree after passing the Metropolitan Examination were those whose parents died between the Metropolitan Examination and the Palace Examination. And anyone whose parents died was required to enter into a 27-month period of mourning where their behavior was very strictly controlled. And those people could not take the Palace Examination. But in spite of the fact that everybody was guaranteed to receive the Jinsi degree, this Palace Examination was still important as part of the official's career inside the bureaucracy, because the rank that you received in the degree determined the specific rank that you were awarded when the Jinsi degree was assigned to you. Most people started their official careers as district magistrates at the 7th level, but you could receive an advanced rank if you did exceptionally well. In addition, those people who scored highest on the candidates were given assignments in the Capital and the Hanlin Institute and were available for special assignments and rapid promotions. So that essentially concludes the presentation here. This is a representation of the imperial exam from the Nanjing Examination Museum. A very comfortable situation compared with the outside 3-walled cells that were used for the other examination. And as Bob indicated, there is a new book, The Chinese Rank Badges. It is currently published, can be ordered from the publisher, will be available from the University of Chicago in April of May. Book's 277 pages in length. About half of the contents of the book is contained in appendices, which cover topics like the examination process, other considerations about Imperial Chinese culture, history of the last 2 dynasties, and other information that may be valuable. That concludes my examination. Thank you for your patience, and I'm ready for your questions. Wake up.
Great. And thank you, David. And it's very informative and really, I took a lot of notes, and so you have to excuse me for pausing here. But I have a lot of questions, but I'm sure that there are some questions from our audience. And I think that I'm going to get a few questions here. And by the way, because this is of the format that we have in Zoom, you must send your questions through the chat or the Q&A button, and then it's sent over to me. So we're not able to sort of hear your voice, although I would love to hear that, hear your voices. I see familiar names and friends out there, you know, it's Nino, Michael Kwan from Santa Barbara, and many other friends. So, but I'll try to do my best to channel you here. There is one question is, David, what is the Honmen Institute that was noted in part of the discussion?
The Honmen Institute was an institute that was basically the compilers and the library and the records holders for the official court. One of the ways that people tried to constrain the unbridled power of the emperor was to record everything he said and everything he did. And those records were compiled by the recorder on the left and the recorder on the right. They were compiled, sent to the Honmen Institute monthly. They were stored as a permanent part of the records there, and they were used again as a way to try and keep the emperor focused on his virtuous behavior under Confucian canons. The history of a dynasty was written by its successor dynasty. And so those records were used to assemble the history of one dynasty, but it was only prepared by a subsequent dynasty. So an emperor could never control the way that he was recorded in history. And so recording his words and his deeds was a way to try and make him adhere to the Confucian standard of virtue and not become too much of an autocrat. They also undertook special compilations when the Qianlong emperor in the Qing Dynasty and the Yongle emperor in the Ming Dynasty compiled the great encyclopedias. Those encyclopedias were compiled and written by the Honmen Institute.
Great. And are the records of the Honmen Institute, just my own follow-up question, are those stored anywhere, archived anywhere?
They were destroyed by fire in the Boxer Rebellion.
Okay. Does that apply to all of the prior examinations then? Or subsequent examinations? When did the examination system end?
I'm sorry, sir?
When did the examination system end, or when did the process end?
It terminated in 1904, 1905. It was a widespread process, and it didn't all terminate simultaneously. But 1904, 1905 is considered to be the official end of the examination process.
Okay, and then
by that time, China had come to recognize that it needed a reform, and studying overseas had become a very important part of Chinese culture at that time. Economic opportunities were increasing because of the introduction of businesses from Europe and the United States. And so the importance of the examination process had started to deteriorate ever since about the reform period of 1898. And so the Boxer Rebellion kind of put the end period to the examination process. It took a couple years for that to become official, but the examination process had started to decline in importance from the reform period in 1898.
So no national exams after that point then?
That is correct.
Okay. And let me see. On the subject of rank badges, were these presented or awarded at the last palace exam?
No, that's an excellent question, and one thing that made my study of rank badges much more interesting than it might otherwise have been. The emperor conferred the right to wear a particular rank on an official. The official had to commission and pay for his own rank badge. There are two implications of that. Number one is that because officials were scattered throughout China and received promotions in various provinces, there was a wide variety of individual idiosyncratic designs that people wanted included in their rank badges, various regional characteristics of the particular artists, all kept the rank badges from becoming consistent or uninteresting. The rank badges didn't solidify to kind of an unvarying design until the middle of the Daoguang Emperor's reign in 1830 or 1840. But prior to that time, the badges varied by province, by individual, and made identifying the sequencing of the design much more challenging. The second implication was that because people had to buy their own court costumes, there are no examples of the last three military ranks. As I said, the military was hereditary, very low status in Ming and Qing dynasties. And court costume cost about 4,000 taels of silver, which was about 80 years of salary of the lowest three ranking people in the military. They just couldn't afford to buy rank badges. And so if anybody thinks that they have either a rhinoceros or a seahorse badge, they probably have bought a fake, because there are no examples of the last three military ranks. People just couldn't afford them.
And so speaking of fakes, and this is my question, were there some that were presented, and then I imagine there must have been a stiff penalty for having a fake if you were caught?
It's really difficult to go on any auction site online and not encounter fake rank badges. The fakes, when I first started collecting, and by the way, the first 6 rank badges I ever bought were fakes. My wife and I were in Hong Kong celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary, and we were buying things to decorate our house. We wanted to decorate our house in a Chinese motif. We bought things without knowing what they were that turned out to be fake rank badges. So nobody should feel bad about buying a fake rank badge. It's the way I got started.
So what kind of price range?
Oh, well,
They were terribly expensive. They were $28 each.
Gene,
Yes.
we are going to have a talk by David next time on rank badges.
Okay.
So I would like to have our talk more focused on the examination process today.
Okay. Well, I'm just sort of jumping ahead because
Mm.
he commented on that.
No,
But
that's true.
well, since rank badges were so important, but this is a question that just kind of came in. Were civil servants buried with their rank badges on? Was it that important?
I honestly don't know anything at all about the marital customs in China. I mean, the actual ceremonies. The rank badges were part of the official court costume. They were not something that was worn outside of official duties, I don't believe. But I wouldn't want to make any firm comment on that. It's just an area of ignorance.
Okay, but yeah, I know that there's could be many levels of achievement, and one of our friends here, Chuck Wu, is asking, how do you advance from a lower rank to a higher one without taking extra examinations?
Yeah.
And how do you obtain the top or number 1 crane rank?
Yeah. It's very interesting to me. The process for becoming an official was so intellectually challenging and so physically challenging that I am surprised that the advancement in ranks was a totally administrative, bureaucratic process. Every year, an official was graded by his superior, and his efficiency report was sent in to the Bureau of Personnel. Every 3 years, the Bureau of Personnel had a massive examination of the last 3 years of reports on every official, and every official was either selected for promotion, selected for continuing in grade, or selected for disenfranchisement to become eliminated from the officialdom because of inefficiency or corruption. And so it was your annual efficiency report that got you up the ladder to the clouds. It was a totally bureaucratic administrative process. And one Ming commentator mentioned that this 3-year examination of efficiency reports was when the court officials collected their rents, an indication that bribery and corruption was not unheard of in the promotion process.
Is there a timetable for promotion?
Yes, I could say every 3 years, you were evaluated for promotion or continuation in your rank. There had to be some other process that was involved other than that bureaucratic thing, because if you started at the 7th rank, and every rank had 2 levels in it, so there were actually 18 ranks. But if you started at 7B, there were 14 ranks to get to the first level. And that was a total of, it would take you 42 years to reach the first level. And that would make you on average about 78, 79 years old. And life expectancy was about 57 at that time. And so there had to be an exceptional process for people who either had accomplished some special task for the emperor or had more money to bribe the people who were recommending promotions or had done something special. The only process that's described is the official 3-year cycle, but there had to be another process because people couldn't live long enough to get to wear cranes otherwise.
That's pretty enlightening. One comment from a question from Grace is, she's heard that a large number of people with Jewish roots, including on her mom's side, held positions.
That's I wouldn't say a large number, but there were missionaries, largely Jesuits, who tried to infiltrate Christianity into China. One of the ways that they did that was compete against the Chinese scholars for predicting celestial events and establishing a legitimate calendar. And in one competition in the Qing Dynasty, the Jesuits beat the Chinese scholars in predicting celestial occurrences, and therefore they were accepted in the court, given official court ranking, and became advisors to the emperor on things associated with celestial phenomenon and calendars.
Now there were Jewish as well as Jesuit.
I am not familiar with Jewish missionaries as much as I have seen commentary about the Catholics. But the Jesuits were a part of the court. generally advisors in things associated with celestial mechanics. You know, the eclipses and things were important events because they indicated that the heavens were taking notice of what was going on Earth. And so if the emperor could not accurately predict eclipses and stuff, they could be seen to be an indication of heaven's displeasure with his rule.
Sounds like a bad omen, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've got a question, you know, and I hope all of you don't mind. You know, we're going a little deeper into the evening than normal, but there's some good questions, and I'm sure all of our minds are still active here. But here's a question from Albert Chang. So, what happened to people who didn't pass the exam, and you know, could they retake it? Do they get any other recognition?
Well, I mean, that depends on what level they stalled out. If they stalled out before the Qing the first qualifying exam, there was absolutely no recognition. What they could do is two general things. They could become clerks in the Yamen and work for the district magistrate. They could become tutors for poor people who couldn't afford good tutors and eke out a living that way. But if you didn't get at least the Zhengyuan degree, there was not much recompense. Excuse me. If you achieved the Jurin degree, that is, if you passed the provincial exam, there was some small hope that you could actually be assigned to an official position. And Jurin degree holders, much higher status, much more economic advantages provided to them just in normal day-to-day life.
So I have a question which I will augment too, but this is from Tailing Wong. She thinks it seems surprisingly benevolent and fair that the examinations were available to all. And I noted in your earlier comments that you had said that any male could take the exam. And so the implication is that even the very poor could take it. And a further part of that question is obviously you had to be able to afford to access and read materials to study, to prepare. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple of things. The only people who couldn't take the examinations were what's generally called tattooed thieves. Thieves were tattooed in the Ming Dynasty. They were branded in the Qing Dynasty. So if you had been tattooed or branded as a thief, you couldn't take the exam. If you were a slave, you couldn't take the exam. And if you were a boat-dwelling fisherman off the southeastern coast, you couldn't take the exam. And if you were the penetrated member of a homosexual relationship, you couldn't take the exam. But there were no economic constraints. But as I said, clan groups and villages would get together to form a tax-exempt foundation that subsidized the studies of promising students from their regions. In addition, the Ming founder was himself a peasant, and he decreed that there be a school opened in every district in China, and that every district school be provided with a complete set of the Confucian classics. And so that also helped to kind of level the playing field a little bit. And that might have been one reason why nearly 50% of all of the officials in the Ming Dynasty came from commoner families.
That's an incredible statistic for me, you know, that.
It is. Remember that 50% of the officials came from 98% of the population, the commoner family. The other 2% also provided 50%. Wealth was important, but it was not overwhelming. It's also true that it was difficult for wealthy families to have an official in subsequent generations. And so that social mobility could work both ways. If you failed to have an official for several generations, your social mobility would decline. When you got an official, it skyrocketed up. So it was a double-edged sword.
Just a quick comment, question too. Were women totally excluded, or did some sort of slip in, or did some fake themselves? pretend to be men?
Women were totally excluded, but not totally illiterate. Wealthy wives and concubines in wealthy families tried to become literate so they could help foster and start to tutor their sons very early in their life. There is no record of any woman ever taking any part in any examination, but that was also so deeply embedded in the culture that, to my knowledge, that prohibition was never recorded either. So that indicates how deeply that particular prejudice was embedded in that society. It was so obviously understood that they didn't even need to record it.
But is there a similar examination system in other cultures, in other kingdoms, in other continents? We have the SAT here, of course, and actually some of the processes here with proctors and locked rooms and such, I see some parallels here, but
Yes.
Was it something that originated with the Chinese examination system? Was it and then copied by other cultures? Or
in particular, one would argue that the acceptance of education as the key to improving your life was accepted by virtually every country in the Pacific Rim. But both Korea and Vietnam had their own rank badge systems and their own examination processes, so that at least in two other cultures, the entire Chinese process was accepted.
And well, given that there was trade and political interaction between those places, between China and Korea and Vietnam and other points in Asia,
Sure.
I imagine that some of those ideas, the concept of rankings carried through also.
It's interesting that Confucius is absolutely silent on international relations. It just deals with the running of a country, and so the international relations in China was something kind of an ad hoc nature, because Confucius himself and the Confucian classics are silent on international relations. But China had two general orientations that they had. In order to protect their borders, they used what they call barbarians to fight barbarians to keep the Mongol tribes and the tribes on the periphery of China competing among themselves so that they wouldn't turn their attention to China. The other process that China used for international relations was what they called the tribute system. It was really a trading economic system, and people who were tribute nations were allowed to send trading expeditions to posts on the periphery of China's borders, and also send small delegations into the capital for trading higher value items. But what China got in return from that is people had to acknowledge the Chinese emperor as the supreme ruler of the world, and they had to conduct themselves according to Chinese court protocol when they came into the capital to trade. And so the Chinese used their economic situation and their advantage in tea and textiles to foster these tribute relationships, which then kind of inculcated the concept of China as the central kingdom and the emperor as the supreme ruler in the world in the outlying countries. But it was the tribute system that they used as the primary management of international relations.
It's a
Um,
long tradition.
Gene,
Bob, yeah.
I'd like to make a comment. I don't know how many of our China Society members remember Anne McGowan, but Anne's grandfather was a Belgian Mandarin. At the turn of the 19th to 20th century, he had reached the rank of first level. And she has a book on him, and she presented it to us, maybe 10 or 15 years
ago. Yeah, I have a copy of that.
Yeah, so it was quite interesting.
Yeah. Well, there's still questions, and if you're still all got the energy, I'll finish a couple of them here.
Eugene, let me make a comment here. If anybody is interested, has a question and that doesn't get addressed here, they can send their questions directly to me at dhugus@AOL, and I would be happy to address them as quickly and as thoroughly as I can. But that's a fallback position. I'm here for as long as anybody is willing to listen to me blather, and as long as my voice holds out.
Oh no, this is rich information, and I just love listening to this. We have a sort of many of us have sort of an abstract idea of the examination system, but I think you provided a lot of depth here, which I really enjoyed. There's a question here. What aspects of the Chinese civil exams would you like to see included in our current academic and civil government environments? I don't know if he or she meant to the American academic and civil environments or current Chinese environments, but maybe you have some thoughts on both.
Yeah, well, I suspect that the actual Chinese government today is continuing the general philosophical orientation and focus on education. China would not have made the economic advancements and progress that it has in the last 30 years without a well-educated workforce available to them. And I have no doubt that the Chinese government is continuing to foster education as a primary way to advance yourself in communist China today. I'm not sure. The only thing that I think is really applicable to our current education system today is the philosophical orientation that education is the way, or learning is the way to advance yourself and to bring honor to your family. Going back to a rote memorization that stifles innovation is probably the last thing in the world we want to do in today's competitive economic environment. They said, but the philosophy that learning is important, and that as a possible total focus of your life is something that probably would stand us in good stead. And whether your learning is academic and done in college, or whether you're learning a trade or learning some skill, learning just intrinsically is valuable. It enhances your life. It lets you enjoy things and appreciate things that you couldn't otherwise do. Part of my fascination with rank badges is that they're a symbol of this examination process, the symbol of a total focus on education as the way to bring honor to your family. And the dedication, I mean, that people would spend 30 or 40 or 50 years attempting to achieve a particular benchmark in education is something that I think would stand us in good stead. In China, in some cases, men as old as 80 would take the provincial examination and fail, and they were sometimes, just as virtue of their persistence and dedication, were sometimes given the Jurin degree as secondary honors. That is, you failed, but we're going to give you the degree anyhow, just to recognize your persistence and your dedication. That kind of persistence and dedication focused on education and learning, I think, would be very valuable for us.
I'm sure many of us here in this audience consider themselves as lifelong learners, and maybe there's still hope I can still get my PhD at 80. And you made a comment earlier too, and sort of repeated it too, and that was that there was some aspect of the examination system where if the examination was based on Confucianism, that orientation tended to stifle innovation. You know, his comment, you know, I saw that comment that Confucius said he never produced anything, and he would only the goal was to learn only the wisdom of the ancients. You know, any thoughts about that? And was there a lot of debate, you know, when those examinations were created over the centuries? You know, did they move away or from Confucianism?
Essentially, no. And that was one of the downfalls of imperial China. There's, and I meant to say that these kinds of topics and understanding the cultural and historical and societal context for rank badges are so important that about 50% of the volume of my new book is devoted to appendices that contain what I hope is helpful information to people to understand the culture and the history and the sociology of imperial China. But quite clearly, I mean, and one of the appendices is the importance of tradition. And in imperial China, to say something was ancient was almost equivalent to saying that it was unimpeachable, that it could not be questioned, that if it was ancient and if it was traditional, then it should not be changed, because, as Confucius said, his only goal was to preserve the wisdom of the ancients. And innovation was, like I said, literally beaten out of the people studying for the examinations. That brought China into a very uncomfortable position after the Industrial Revolution, when the Western powers had a technological advantage over China and could impose their will on China militarily. I mean, you know, the current Chinese, I think, have a tendency to refer to the period from 1842 to 1948, that is from the start of the First Opium War to the communist takeover of China, as the century of humiliation. And that humiliation came not only at the hands of the Western powers in the First and Second Opium Wars and the Boxer Rebellion, but also was internally generated by the Taiping Rebellion, and probably most dramatically brought to the Chinese attention when their defeat by Japan in 1895. And Japan had been a tribute nation to China for centuries prior to that. and to be faced with their military inferiority by a previous tribute nation really was the genesis for the Guangxu emperor initiating the reform period of 1898. And so it was that lack of innovation that stifled China's progress and put it in a totally untenable situation with respect to even previously tribute nations when they were faced with a technological and military superiority. And so they had to break with Confucianism, at least that portion of it, in order to progress the way that China has.
That's pretty insightful. Bob, you have any comments on that? Thoughts on that?
Well, no, I think that everybody sort of realizes that now. I think the difference was that if you were in Imperial Qing Dynasty China, you would really face a big dilemma as to what you had been studying and what you had really believed and how to face this modernization. How do you make the change? And I mean, it caused tremendous amount of misery in China at that time.
Yeah, but and again, in defense of Confucianism, it was well, the Qin Dynasty was a book-burning dynasty, and they were legalists. They were as anti-Confucian as you might ever want to see. But the Han Dynasty that replaced them, and from the Han Dynasty forward, so from about 200 BC, 200 AD, 200 BC to about 1840, Confucianism worked just fine. It inculcated good behavior, personal advancement, focus on education, right behavior, virtue as being the key to governmental leaders, and that served its purpose largely unimpeded for almost 2,000 years, and so you can't disparage Confucianism, in general, because it eventually became overcome by the Industrial Revolution. You need to remember that it had 2,000 solid years of government behind it when it finally turned out to be an ineffective and dysfunctional way to run a society.
Yep, and that led to civil war. So.
Civil war twice. The Taiping Rebellion started out as a racial issue, but turned into a religious movement. But that was a major civil war that lasted for 14 years, and then later on the civil war between the Republicans and the communists. But like I say, civil war twice.
Yeah. I see a late comment. Actually, no, I saw it late. I'm sorry, Albert, but I just saw it now. Albert has seen a copy of an examination, and it included discussion of Aristotle and Plato. So are you familiar with the content of the examinations that we might have discussed? Western philosophy?
There are only, I have only encountered about 5 or 6 actual questions on the examinations, and they appeared not to be relevant to the Confucian classics. So I am not familiar with the specific questions on the examination. I know that in the later examinations, there finally was a book on Europe that was part of the local examinations as part of the reform period, and that included some subjects of European origin, and so there could clearly have been some introduction of European thought into the very late low-level examinations that might have included Aristotle and Plato. but my suspicion is that those would have been questions that would have been asked after the reform period of 1898.
I guess that leads to sort of the overall worldview that the imperial court had of itself. Was it still the Middle Kingdom, or was there a greater increasing awareness of the European or the Western world? And maybe there might have been a transition, or maybe an ongoing recognition that there was a larger body of knowledge beyond the Chinese sphere.
Yeah, that was kind of forced on the Chinese. I mean, primarily after the Second Opium War, but the First Opium War required that the Chinese open 5 ports, and those ports became a place where Westerners could live and trade and deal with the Chinese. That there was some introduction and infusion of Western ideas, I think, from those treaty ports from the First Opium War. But from the Second Opium War in 1860, there were 11 more ports opened, as I recall, and Westerners were given unlimited freedom to travel into the interior of China. Christian missionaries took advantage of that to try and spread Christianity. They were never terribly successful in doing that. And it's a measure probably of the resilience of the Chinese society. But there was this increased penetration after the Second Opium War into the interior of China, and railroads were starting to be introduced. And there was even a Chinese match factory that was started by Western companies after the Second Opium War. And so there was that penetration post 1860. I mean, it started in 1842, but became more prominent and more prevalent after 1860. And then you had the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, and that allowed foreign delegation to actually take up residence in the capital, which had been something that had never been allowed before. So you had that increasing influence and exposure to European ideas.
And that disrupted the traditional way of operating.
Surely it did. I mean, and that was the Boxer Rebellion. I mean, the Boxer Rebellion was, exile the foreigners was their battle cry, and they were opposed to the foreign influence disrupting Chinese society, and they were certainly correct that it was in fact a disrupting element, and the Boxer Rebellion was in fact supported by the Dowager Empress at that time, Grand Dowager Empress Shishi, and she was very anti-foreign in her orientation as well, and it's quite clear that the encroachments into China were in fact turning in to be a disrupting influence in Chinese society. Whether you consider that eventually beneficial because it allowed China to become industrialized in an advanced country that it is today, or whether you say it destabilized a well-functioning government, I mean, you can look at it in either of those two perspectives.
David, I think we could continue for hours. But perhaps we could draw this to a close. And as you provided your email address to others already, and you could repeat that, was it Hugus?
Yes, at AOL. And anybody who can see my name, it's just my first initial and my last name at AOL. And so, like I say, if I get inundated with emails, it may take me a while to respond, but I will do my best to respond to every email that I receive.
So,
okay, I have some comments that we have to make some announcements.
okay, yeah, no,
Okay.
I was going to pass it on to you. But
Okay.
but first, I want to thank you, David, for enlightening. I think I used that word already, but again, I can't emphasize it enough, I guess. But I learned a lot, and I'm sure we could learn more. And so I look forward to a future program for you, which Bob will probably announce. But this is good for of us as a Chinese American historical organization. We could probably see some parallels with the Chinese American, Asian American emphasis on education and taking exams. In my neighborhood in the San Gabriel Valley here, we have SAT schools, and there's just sometimes obsessive emphasis on really succeeding in taking these exams in order to succeed in life. But so that's a whole additional discussion, and we could probably get into that sometime. But we can really see where some of our roots have influenced our community today. So thank you, David. So I'll let you, Bob, have some closing comments, and then I'll close it.
Okay.
Sir, the pleasure was mine, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to indulge myself in my kind of unilateral focus on Chinese rank badges and ancillary subjects. So I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
I want to thank David for not just giving this talk, but giving this talk on such short notice. About 3 weeks, we had scheduled a program with David, but I hadn't made it concrete until about, or tried to make it confirmed until about 2.5 weeks ago, and I wasn't able to contact him. And I tried and I tried and I tried, and I finally found out that he was in Egypt. So he has only been back to the United States for less than a week, and he had to prepare this program, which was different than the one we had originally asked him to do. So I really appreciate doing such a wonderful job on such short notice. The other thing is that we have asked David to do some more talks, and these talks will be focused on rank badges themselves. And the next one should be on rank badges, and we will send out an announcement on that. And it's an entirely different field. It's not going to be on, I guess, the government and whatever, but it will be on, well, in ways it will be, but it will be on some of these really wonderful rank badges themselves. So we're looking forward to that, and I hope that both the Historical Society and our China Society will attend. Please talk to your friends who registered or didn't make this program. Tell them that they missed a wonderful program, and to see it online. The other announcement I have is that there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about the exhibit Ink Dreams, which is at LACMA, and there was very, very favorable comments on that. One of the ending comments was that you should view this not to be missed show. I want to stress again that LACMA has two exhibits right now. They have the exhibit Legacies of Exchange, which is on contemporary art exhibit from a museum in Shanghai, and they have this Ink Dreams, which is a fabulous exhibit. And we have had talks on both of those exhibits. If you go to see them, and you really should go to see them, because according to Stephen Little, this will be the last Chinese exhibit for the next 2 years. And it's well worth seeing. So please go to see that exhibit, those 2 exhibits. I guess maybe we can close now with a thank you again to David, and thanks to everybody who made this program possible.
I can just make a quick comment too. The Chinese Historical Society always has had an annual fundraising dinner, but for the past year, 2 years now, we haven't been able to do business as usual. So we really depend on support from all of you out there for your memberships and your contributions. It's the end of year right now. I know that Angela Lancaster, our VP of membership, or membership secretary, is in the audience, and she drafted a really nice membership appeal in the recent newsletter, and we hope that you can support us for the coming year. All of our programs are free, and all of our resources are really free. We have a great library, we have archives, and we have a lot of material. So this coming week, we have some students from Santa Monica coming in to do some research in our archives. So there's a lot of value in the information that Bob and the China Society and the Chinese Historical Society are providing. So we hope that you can support us by renewing your memberships for the coming year. Our website, chssc.org, has all of the information. And so we hope that you can stay tuned and watch some of our prior programs. They're all online. And we hope to see you again soon. We miss you all in person. It's always been great in the past to be able to break bread and have tea together and chat. But we're going to do the best we can, and we're going to get through this. So we look forward to seeing you in December and in the coming year. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and have a good evening.